covered. Cameras rolling, notes are being taken, so we will start today's task force meeting. I think my hiccups went away temporarily, but if they come back, please ignore. Pleasure to be joined with Susie on our task force. We also have Travis, Lori, Carter, myself, Mayor Rick, and we have a few participants in the audience as well. Les, our awesome financial liaison, all of the names, I don't know, extraordinaire, Chip online. So, got some updates, maybe shift our timeline and what our targets are. I'm wanting to definitely spend a chunk of time. I want to go over like what our updated timeline is, but also what we want to do as far as like informing the public. What does that look like? What do you think is most effective? And then what our schedules are like so that we can maybe put some dates on the calendar. But that's a little bit out there planning. So those are my priorities right now. And we also have Jim Johnson joining us from the clerk's office. So we've got a full team here, or almost full team. We're missing half. But
yes, who wrote and said he couldn't make it.
I spoke to Hal briefly, and he gave me some things to pass on.
Great.
A little bit ago.
Awesome. Well, thank you, Travis. All right, so I'm going to pass the mic to Rick /Chip.
Some quick updates.
Yeah, quick updates,
Okay.
please. Thank you.
So Tuesday morning, is it just this last Tuesday? Was it really? I really am questioning it.
Yes, it's been a while. It was Tuesday.
Okay, so Tuesday morning, we did a meeting with the three folks from Subsec Bank. Chip was there, Carter was there, Lori was there, Jim and I were both there. I think that's everybody. We presented the cash flow certificate that we had prepared the previous week. Chip went over it with some care with the folks from Pasumsic Bank and answered their questions. I think they understood what we were asking for by the time we finished. Their timeline didn't match what was in my head. They were saying that their normal process would be that they would have a meeting this coming Wednesday of their advisory team, and then that team would report to the board the following Wednesday, I believe it was, and that would be the first time the board could actually make a decision about it, which turns out to be July 2nd, which is too late for us to have met our obligation on the 30th of June to that $1.8 million line of credit, and paid all the rest of our bills and made sure that we finished the year with cash in our bank account. I think they heard that loud and clear, and they said they would go off and discuss it and come back with some follow-up. And I haven't heard anything. Chip, you haven't heard anything from Ellen Stanley or anyone over there, have you?
No, unless they all resigned. I haven't heard.
Unless they all resigned. Yeah. So you know, I was trying to give them a little space to breathe. I figured I would call or email Ellen on Monday and just say, what are you thinking about timing at this point? And do you have questions about what we've proposed? The one thing that Chip sent them current balance sheets, a current balance sheet covering all the accounts is the way I should probably say that, on Tuesday. And so they have that and our cash flow certificate. They restated that they would really need an indication from the attorneys for the city that what we were proposing is appropriate in terms of the steps, right? And so the steps that we proposed, just to make sure we're all on the same page, are that we would arrange for a $2.725 million loan in anticipation of taxes immediately. And if we do that, it would mean that we start the new year with some cash to operate with, basically. And that would include meeting all of our obligations to date, so that we would begin from a clean slate.
And that one does not require a vote because it's a 1 year.
That's what I think we all believe. And an initial response from Bob Fletcher with SPNF, the attorney, I think, Chip, the way I read that was he was basically in agreement with that much of the strategy. I think he has questions about the rest of our strategy that we need to talk about. Does that sound right to you, Chip?
Yes, other than he recognized right off that we were borrowing to pay off a line of credit, which means that really our line of credit was being extended, but I think he kind of forgave that statement.
Yes. So we will need, Chip and I are trying to get a time with Bob. I wrote to him today to ask if we could set up a time next week to meet with him, because he had a lot of other questions about our proposed timeline and actions, and he may have some concerns. But if we were to move forward the way Chip and I have crafted that proposal, with a lot of actual input from Carter and Lori too, then what would happen next is on the 7th of July, council would warn an election, a special meeting for the purpose of the voters weighing in on the question of how to manage our debt. And I won't rehearse all of that, but I mean, the quick version is we'd ask for permission to go after $1 million loan that would pay back the due to others line on the sewer fund to the operating budget, and we go after $1.8 million against the operating fund deficit, and we would go after permission to raise the borrowing limit from $800,000 to roughly $65 or $875. I now regret that I used both those numbers because they both ended up in a newspaper article contradicting each other, and I should have known better, but whatever, right? Like, it was my fault for not being clear. It's because I don't have that final number, and I've been intentionally fogging a little bit. But somewhere around $75,000 additional borrowing is going to be needed when that fire truck shows up. So that's the second step. And then the third step, again, with SPNF's approval, would be to arrange for a short-term note by October to cover the $3 million water tower expenditure, which we already have permission for, but we have not arranged for through the Vermont Bond Bank. And in order to arrange through the Vermont Bond Bank, if everything goes well, the earliest we would see that money is probably April or May of next year. So we're going to need something to cover from between when the line of credit for construction is due in October and when that Vermont Bond Bank money might be available. So we've asked Fiscal for their response to that request as well. Would they be willing to make that short-term note to us? And unless Bob Fletcher comes back and says we're trying to go at that all wrong, I suspect that's going to be a pretty straightforward decision, because we're just borrowing in anticipation of bond revenue at that point, bond income. So I think that's all of the pieces of that. I asked the council on Monday night to hold Monday night this coming week and Wednesday night this coming week in the hopes that we would have some decision-making to do about next steps. But it became clear on Tuesday that we're not going to have much information from Pasumsik. Certainly we won't have any information by Monday. And that this group is going to, whatever recommendations you want to make, I really am going to need more time to make sure I know how to interpret it and put it in a packet for the council and the community. So the earliest, I think, we will not meet Monday night. The earliest we would meet is Wednesday, and it's possible we could meet some other night next week or put it off until Monday the 30th and still be within the June 30 deadline, though right up against it, as usual. So I think those are all the deadline pieces.
What was the date for the special election? It was August, right?
Yes, thank you, I didn't mention that. If we warn it on the 7th of July, then we should, we have enough time for Jim to publicize the warning appropriately and hold the actual election on August 12th.
And that's about for the bond.
And that's for the bond questions, yeah, or the various loan questions we need to ask for permission.
And there's also the $220,000 tax adjustment.
Yeah, so this is an open question that I think we all and Chip need to be doing some talking about over the next couple of weeks. We've got some time before we have to come up with the language for that election. And I have not been pushing that piece of it very hard because I'm still not sure how, there are parts of the budget that I think may warrant further consideration. And I want to make sure if we're going to go back to the voters with some kind of a special request on the 12th of August, that we really have a pretty solid sense that the budget is what we want it to be. So I think one of the tasks that would be helpful over the next 2.5 weeks, would be for this group to help us do a deep dive, at least on the operations budget, and maybe have the Water and Sewer Task Force do a deeper dive on the water and sewer budget. And I let the department heads know that I would like to go through the budget with them pretty carefully over the next week or so and see what ideas they have, and to make sure that we haven't made other mistakes that we just aren't aware of yet, or things where we were kind of, I would say, given time constraints, necessarily sloppy on back in January, if they need to be tightened or readjusted before we go back to the voters and ask to do anything with that.
The other thing that's been kind of ruminating for me since Tuesday, and Chip, maybe you can answer this question, is we keep saying we're going to ask for 1.8 million for the operating deficit, which we believe is at least most of it is tied to the misappropriation of the revenue, or the
Understanding of
the misunderstanding of the revenue per
from the
year.
state.
From the money from the state. But does that figure, Chip, include 25, 26 or not? Because I keep trying to figure out where we're coming into 1.8 million in the operating line. If since 2018 it's been roughly 200,000, or
It's been less.
it's been less than 200,000. So that's what, 7 years. So is it including 25, 26? So maybe we don't have to ask for that other 220? No, we know that for certain.
Yeah, it's certainly not included. I mean, our current balance sheet has nothing to do with what we budgeted for 25, 26.
Okay.
Right? But Chip, you may have some ideas about where that $1.8 million deficit line actually comes from. I think you're right, Lori, that some portion of it, at least 2/3 of it is probably coming from that mistaken budgeting.
Right.
But Chip, if you've got other thoughts about where we should be poking around looking, I'm open to them.
I thought it was water sewer.
Yeah, it's primarily a cash deficit because of water sewer.
Yeah.
Okay.
The general fund kept borrowing money so it could pay bills, let alone shorting itself in cash revenue for taxes. And
Yeah,
it's the
that's-
combination of the line of credit that has been necessary simply to pay bills, which the majority of would have been covered by the due to and froms from the water and sewer funds. However, we took the cash out of those funds for cash flow and greatly reduced
So
the amount that they owe us. So it's a combination of those two factors that gave cash a shortfall. And
so
part of the 220,000 for the next year budget, when I had recommended and the board adopted the motion, the city council adopted the motion to not fund the spreadsheet of committed reserves, I had said it is entirely possible in FY 25-26, we may not be able to meet those obligations at either because of the same tax calculation problem. So if they gathered that, they were already preempted that we may ask them not to fund in next year's budget those commitments, like we took them away in 25.
right.
If they're in 26, we may not raise the money for them.
Do we know yet what the impact to the taxes will be in light?
Can you hear, Chip? Can you hear when Travis is speaking?
Not much.
Yeah, just speak up.
Do we know what the tax impact is going to be from the bond at this point, or have an estimate of that? 'Cause I imagine that people will want to know.
Do you mean how much their taxes would go up
Yes, if they go.
For debt service.
for debt service? I don't think we know that yet. So,
It's a penny raises 32,000. So mathematically, whatever the new debt service is divided by 32,000.
so the last thing I'll say, Carter, is kind of the segue into the other stuff you were raising, which is, I'm thinking a lot now this week about, okay, how do we interpret all of this? And I made I don't know if anybody's seen it, but I made what I thought was a valiant effort that was not particularly successful at trying to slim down all of what we've been talking about, and I got it down to 35 minutes with funky little signs I made.
37 minutes.
Yeah, that's right. When I started out in my head, it was 15 to 20 minutes, and no matter how fast I went, I couldn't get it all out. So it was good practice for me, which is kind of how I saw it, right? Like I'm trying to figure it out. But I spent 20 years in a job on the US-Mexico border where I was trying to help people understand really big economic concepts through popular education techniques. And so I've actually been thinking, okay, what are the things we can do? And this morning, I was talking about that with Dave LaForce, and he said, oh, well, what's really interesting is that we have an open book policy in our business for all of our employees. And in the last few years, they've been doing this thing where they take coins that they make that have different values on them, and they give a little worksheet to their employees, and they ask their employees in groups of 4 or 5 to decide which coins make up each part of their budget. And he says, it's fascinating because they all do the exercise and nobody's ever close to what it actually is. And then they start from there and help people understand what it is really. And I thought, gosh, that's the beginning of its strategy, right? Like, I could even say something like, on your way in the door, if you want to take a few minutes, put your coins in and then we'll show you the result. So people could, I don't know when it is or how it is, and that may not be the right technique, but it felt to me like the kind of creative thinking that could simplify this to the point where people could really understand what we're doing here. You're in charge from here, I'm done.
Okay, did you want to say something?
I just had 2 questions. One is, how does the cumulative deficit of $4.3 million as of June 2026 relate to us getting a tax anticipation note of $2.7 million, which even if we got on July 1st doesn't seem to cover the deficit of $4.3 million, which I assume must mean how much money we owe at that time. Can somebody explain to me?
You want that one, Chip, or do you want me to do it?
Go ahead.
So I think, and Chip will correct me, I'm sure, if I'm wrong, but the answer to the question is that what you see in that cash flow projection shows all of our obligation, but not all of the potential income from borrowing, right? So what's not shown in there is if the voters give us permission to borrow $1 million on the sewer line and $1.8 million on the operating budget and $3 million on the water tower and $875,000 on a fire truck. If all of that money comes in, that's how we finish the year where we do.
Okay, so, and the second thing was...
I want to make sure, Chip, is that a clear explanation? Is that?
Yes.
Okay.
Okay, and the second question I have off the top is the loan that we have for the water tower is at $2.4 million. Are we expecting that there will be another $600,000 to finish off the water tower before it's done? Because other than that, we shouldn't be anticipating we could borrow $3 million if the loan is only for $2.4 million.
You want that one, or you want me to do it? Go ahead if you want.
You can do it. You can do it.
All right, so I'll tell you what I think. First of all, that loan is actually not maxed out yet. So we've only borrowed, where are we, $1.5 or so million against that $2.4 million line of credit for construction. If we had, the best guess right now is that there's maybe a minimum of another $600,000 in borrowing that will be, or an expense to complete the water tower project. Does that sound close, Jim? So we could theoretically actually come in as much as $200,000 or $300,000 under the line of credit limit when we complete the project. We just don't know those numbers yet.
Okay.
When we finish, you're right, the maximum we could borrow would be 2.4 if things didn't break our way on that. And this is the part where, Chip, I want to make sure I understand it correctly. But my understanding is that what's going on there is we will have spent the $3 million or close to it to get the thing built, plus all the grant money we took in. It's just that the rest of what we've spent got eaten up or disappeared into the overall deficit. So borrowing the $3 million allows us to reclaim or recapture that cash. But I want to be sure I'm saying that correctly, Chip. Is that your understanding?
Yes, I believe there were bills paid for the water tower project that did not use line of credit for construction. And so the total project cost less the grant revenue is what the bond authority is. So we may be paying off less than 2.4 in a line of credit, but allowed to bond 2.8 or $3 million based on actual cost. And again, that's because in part of, we didn't need the money, we were already in the line of credit in the general fund, and we paid some of the water tower bills with that money.
Right.
Thanks.
Great questions. You can tell I've been obsessing about them.
Well, she has too.
Yeah, I'm sure you have. We should get together and obsess together more often.
I'll call you at 3 in the morning.
That's about what I'm doing it, so it could work really well. We should meet for coffee. Too bad there's not a 24-hour Denny's.
Just leave the rest of us out today.
Okay, any other questions, just to like shore up understanding, because I think it's relevant.
So what's the total number all in?
What's what?
What the total number all in, the fire truck, $1 million against sewer, $3 million bond, what's that total
Yeah,
number?
like 9.3.
Something like that. I've been saying 9 million plus in my head.
Yeah, that's around that.
Nothing, just a tiny number.
Just, yeah.
And that's total obligations.
That would be if we took all of the loans that we are proposing, it would add up to that amount. All of them.
However,
Yeah, go ahead,
the
Chip.
bank asked the same question. The bank asked the same question. And so the first loan is to, if you will, restructure the $1.8 million that was the line of credit. So it's replacing one debt with another debt, with the intention that the vote for the 1.8 million deficit bond is to take something short-term and make it long-term debt to reduce the amount of payments that are due annually. The million for the sewer is $1 million for the sewer to have long-term debt so that the general fund cash can get $1 million back to operate with. And then the line of construction for the water tower, which I don't think has been 100% used to pay all the bills, because I think part of general fund cash paid initial bills on the water tower without a line of credit. And so when that converts to a bond anticipation note, sometime on or before October when the line of credit is due, it's going to restructure that line of credit debt into a short-term one-year bond anticipation note to hopefully be picked up by the Vermont Bond Bank and make it a long-term debt to lower the payments annually to the bond bank. So the 9.6 number in that spreadsheet does not turn out to be 100% all new indebtedness. It is designed to be restructuring short-term debt into long-term debt.
Yeah, that's really helpful, I think. And go ahead, Lori.
Now, I was going to say that, and the 2.75 initially is really in and out because it's tax money.
Right.
So that's
right.
Kind of comes out in the wash.
Right, though we need that
You
loan.
need it to, yeah.
Though if we've done our work well, it will pay. It will be as a net zero at the end of the year. So I wouldn't really call it. It's certainly not long-term debt, right? It's just cash flow debt.
No.
And are all of those transition, what's the term we're looking at for the bond? 30 years? What?
I don't think we know the answer to that question yet. You know, I keep saying in my head, we're talking like for these loans that we would ask permission for in August, I think we're probably looking at a minimum of 10 years on those and maybe longer. And certainly on the water tower, it wouldn't surprise me to see us extend out to 20 years.
And the fire truck, I gave you a name, the one that the former fire chief gave me, is, we don't even know, because we're talking about the possibility of, can we do a municipal equipment lease or long, something like 10 years or 15 years from not even from Pasumsic, right? I mean, it's possible to go look.
Almost certainly it would not come from Pasumsic.
Right, and do some different vehicles, for that.
Questions, good answers. And the other thing that brought up is like what that subtotal was, because when the bank asked it, one of the footnotes on their cash flow document was does not exceed $5 million generally. And then we had to talk about how the tax anticipation, how it's restructuring long term. So that was definitely a point we looked at. Okay, so going back to bringing the public on board, having these, I don't know if they would call focus groups, training sessions, overviews, walkthrough, all of the words, but I definitely think there is something to kind of taking a step back and getting the basics of budgeting, because I think just in generally, the constituents I hear all the time, well, why do we spend so much money on X? And it's this tiny piece of the whole budget, and I think it would be a really neat opportunity to just kind of big picture look and how funds flow through a local government, and how there are some big obvious takeaways, like kind of our federal government's always in debt too, but how we probably shouldn't be doing that, and how it shouldn't really run like a business, but it kind of has to, and all of those nitty-gritty things. If there's a way, as Rick mentioned, something with like a tactile, like a hands-on learning moment is so helpful for all ages, including adult learners, and it makes it more interesting. So I could be tasked with like looking into some lessons, because this would go back to my teaching background, and I'm happy to do that. But I also wanted to get like, what do you guys think would be helpful? And just in generally, should it be one big, a kind of, I don't know if it would be something here down at the Gateway or at the municipal building, or if this is something that rather a series of videos on NEK-TV that we really push and we record, and it's more of a presentation, or is there in-person moments? What do you think is actually going to work with your neighbors? Because that's really, at the end of the day, it's like I could really throw my all into a really cool hands-on, moment where there's like breakout groups and you come back and you think and talk about it, but like what's really going to resonate and actually get around and inform people, because that's really what matters.
My first just gut feeling reaction.
Just speak up.
Yeah. My first gut feeling reaction is that maybe you should consider not presenting all the information yourself.
Yes.
Government's not always the most trustworthy organization.
I beg your pardon.
And getting some community partners that are strong in finance, like Ellen, some folks that may come in that get a good handle on where things are to help you present the information. So it's coming from members of the community as well, not just the people at the helm. Might make it land with a little more trustworthiness.
My immediate response to that is, I think that's what this team is for. Like, in fact, that's what we've been doing, is doing this deep dive. And if the three of you, that is excluding Carter and myself for a moment, and Hal, we're in a position, if we created the right tools for you, what would it look like to have you become, at least at some level, interpreters of this as well?
Don't do it. And I'm saying that as a citizen sitting here. Don't do it. He's right.
Don't do
For
what?
him to not do it?
No. Just as Travis said that Carter should not be the one walking out.
Or I should.
None of you should be.
So I'm saying, that's exactly what I'm saying. So who should? Because I'm saying, I think that's what these four should do. That Hal, Susie, Travis, and Lori would be the the lead team on the actual interpretation.
You're gonna have to be really careful with that one.
We have to be careful with everything we're doing here. I mean, I'm asking you all too, like how you feel about that. We certainly can't go ask Pasumsic Bank to do it, right? So Ellen can't do it.
I think, I want to say something, because I know I sent this out to the group. I happen to think that this is the right group to do it because we have been sitting here and we do know the numbers. I am not, as I've promised you guys, not going to get into they did this and we did that. However, we have to make it very clear why things have happened, because that is going to be the ultimate question. So we know for a fact that when you look at the spreadsheet, a number on the spreadsheet got pulled from an actual 2017-18 budget actual, got moved to the 2018-29 budget. Who did it? Doesn't matter. That is exactly what happened, and we know it. The second piece that we know is that we are aware that for 8 years, the city council did not raise water and sewer rates properly. And we also know that for 6 years, the city council did not look for ways to overcome an $185,000 a year deficit when we lost the money from Casella for the leachate. Those are facts. And unfortunately, now we have to do something about it. And this is what we're doing.
You have another fact.
Well,
And the other fact is that issues were raised by people, citizens,
Yes.
not audience, was citizens who vote. Issues were raised and the citizens got beaten up. That's real. A lot of people saw that. You cannot brush that under the rug. It's not going to go away. Too many people saw it.
and there's one other
Real.
piece that you can't just come with the history and the proposed plan going forward. I think you, the council, have to explain what the guardrails are that is going to keep this from happening again. It's one thing to dig yourself out once, but if the city goes on a spending spree, that'll be bad.
And it's not even just this council abiding by whatever guardrails. It's got to be guardrails that predict that there will be other people in the future
Sure.
who are voted in, and the qualifications aren't necessarily there for the people who are voted in. And so the guardrails have to protect us against future people, not necessarily these people at all. These people are trying to correct it.
And you even had one person in the past who presented herself as Miss Fiscal Responsibility, said it on numerous occasions at council meetings, used it as a cudgel to shut down other people. We all saw how effective that was. You can't minimize it.
So I'm going to take this out of kind of a screenshot out of the water and sewer meeting that I was in a couple of weeks ago. And that is that they are working on, what do they call it?
5-year thing?
It's the, sorry, I just totally lost the word I was looking for. They're going to be writing new rules about what ordinances. Now we're not writing ordinances. However, there is no reason that we can't present a history. This is where we are, and this is our anticipation for the future. That this has to, that these things happen at the city council meetings. You guys are reading the budgets every week. You're not just being said, here, pass this. You're reviewing it. And we have to start somewhere. We can't, who knows if all of us will be around in 5 or 10 or 15 or 20 years. So I'm just saying, we can present a groundwork now in hopes that that will continue and best practices, as it were, on how to do this.
And my assumption is that there are no best practices outlined in our bylaws as a city. So we're supposed to warn for meetings, we're supposed to do all these things, but there's nothing in place for fiscal responsibility or guardrail. Like, for me, I think that would be a really strong signal to the public that we actually mean what we're saying, and that this isn't just for this immediate council's, term. This is how Newport's going to run going forward. Like, we're done with whatever this was, and it stinks that this is what happened, but this is current state, and this is the path forward. And the only path forward is to set up new regulations for us internally or as a community to make sure that this never happens again.
You were focusing on the numbers, and the numbers are important, but not everybody has a head for macroeconomics like this. I struggle with it, but just understanding the past, and I think feeling some security in the future is actually more important than this bond, this borrowing, this mechanism. The numbers are important, but the trust doesn't come from explaining the numbers correctly. I think the trust comes from the other pieces.
I think the charter has a piece of it. The charter expects us balance out at the end of the year, and that it would be very important at the end of the year for people to read the language of the charter again and see what it takes to get us to balance at the end of the year, and that we've conformed to that. That would be major, because no one ever looked at it, at least at a public meeting, in the last 15 years.
And then what happens if it isn't balanced? There needs to be some, like you said, when the deficit was 185,000, there needs to be some mandatory process in place where special meetings are held and some plan is developed to begin reduction of that. When it's in its infancy, because it snowballs, it's easy to sweep it away.
I suspect that what you're talking about is a charter, a new charter, a renewed or revised charter, which we know we need for on this and a number of other levels. We're working with a charter that is pretty antiquated. And while it's true, what Anna's saying is true, that I think they did their level best to try and write some of those guardrails in. It's also true that the language is antiquated. It's difficult for people to read and understand, and it's difficult to use as the kind of tool that Anne's describing, in my judgment. And I've now read it many times. And still, it's a hard document to read and understand. And it's got things in it that I really do believe are probably well beyond their useful life as governing ideas for the city. So, we're going to have to do that. And one question I have is, when's the most appropriate time to take that on? It was my assessment 3 months ago that would be best left for another term, not to try and do it in the next year or two. I'll be honest, I have growing questions about whether that's wise, because I think the charter may actually also contain provisions that could make it really difficult for the city to do some of the development that it wants and needs to do in order to get us out of this mess in the long term. So I haven't come to any conclusions, but I'll just say I think the charter and the way it's written is actually a fundamental part of the problem right now. And we have to go back and take a careful look. And we talk with people in other parts of the state, and they're like, oh yeah, we've heard about Newport's charter, right? It's pretty infamous because it's in many ways far more regressive or far more limiting than state statutes are that are governing most of the rest of the state. So we are held to a much different standard, and in some ways higher standard.
Smell a task force on the horizon.
Next year.
Yeah.
But in the meantime,
Or a year after.
But in the meantime, it is our charter. It takes a long
That's right.
time to get the charter
does.
changed, and it would be nice to try to abide by it.
Oh, not just try, we should be, I
We
mean,
have to.
Is it a-
let's be clear, the charter absolutely governs the actions of this city. And everything we're doing from here forward, whatever may have happened to get us to this position, has to be built into that charter, unless we're going to say it's simply impossible, and here's what we're going to have to do about it, which would take more conversation with attorneys and voters and everybody. Like,
It's not the charter that got us into this mess. It's a mistake. It was cluelessness about the Casella money. Yet we all knew that. So there were several pieces. That was nothing to do with the charter. So whereas it might be
Fair enough.
convenient when you want to monkey with the charter for other reasons, you need to be very careful.
well, please be careful about the accusation you just made, Pam, because that's not what's going on. What I'm saying, and I want to be really clear about what I'm saying and not have it misinterpreted, is that the charter, there are a lot of people in this community who have agreed for a while that the charter is written in problematic ways, and it constrains the city in problematic ways. It's no secret, and we've been talking about it for as long as I've been around. There's been conversation about that. What I'm saying is that part of the reason that the charter is so difficult for the community to use effectively as a tool is the fact that it's been written, rewritten, and written again in antiquated language that is very hard to read and interpret.
I'm not disputing that. I am questioning the timing.
Yeah, I'm questioning all the time. I mean, right now it feels like everything is raining.
And so I've been writing down like bullets of like kind of buckets of what we want to review. And one of the things is the recourse, is if we don't use these lending tools, if we don't act in the planned way due to the charter, what are we as a council going to have to do, which isn't pretty.
Raise
So-
the tax rate.
Yeah.
Important.
And I don't even, it's like not even a threat because it is just abiding by our charter. It is realizing and taking stock of the reality of what we need to do, what projects we have bitten off. And so that's a whole other thing because it is, okay, this is our charter and this is how we're working with it. But going back to did you have a chance? I meant to send it to everybody, but the financial internal controls, which Chip sent like a shortened spreadsheet of it, and then there was a whole walkthrough by VLCT.
No, I haven't looked at it yet.
That's okay. So there are some state statutes and there are some practices that we could just, it's already, it's not, I wouldn't say boilerplate, but it is, there are some steps that we can immediately kind of present and show. So we don't have to necessarily come up with them. So that's already one tool that I would say that we need to like discuss, review with the clerk's office, make that recommendation to council. I think that's a pretty straightforward one. So that'll be some homework. I'll send that to y'all and you can review it by the next time we meet. Okay, but going back to the other buckets are budgeting basics, just understand the concepts and also talk about the numbers. But I definitely hear what Travis is saying because it's not just what's this bond book doing, you know, the numbers, but like a historical accountability of why we are here and naming it, whether, because there's, again, going back to those basics, because if we don't talk about the foundation or the structure, and I have another teacher in the room, you know, it's not going to land. It's not going to stick. And then the third piece would be like a path forward. What are lending tools that we're using? And then also maybe folding in those internal checklists or not toolkit. And then those are like the guardrails. So there's kind of all mushy. I'm kind of could probably make 3 buckets.
I think there's the point that you brought up is important. I wouldn't dwell too long on what it looks like if we don't act, because you don't want to discourage people, but
Yeah.
they need to know that it isn't just business as usual if we don't do anything. There's actual consequences involved, so we do have to lay those
And
out.
somehow we've got to do that in a way that doesn't sound like a threat.
Right,
Yeah.
exactly.
Do we have an answer for where were the auditors?
Oh, boy, am I glad you raised that question.
Because I think that will probably be the first question somebody asks.
Yeah.
So that is,
Thank you, Rhoda.
yes, so that is another piece of teeing up, putting out an RFP, getting a new auditor. I recently asked how long we've had our auditor, and it was, Jim, a long time. best practice is turn them over pretty frequently, every few years or so. Any other opinions on that? Because that's what I know, but
I'll just say, I wrote today to
Yeah.
Chip and Jim, and I think I copied Carter, and I can't remember who else I copied. No, I didn't copy you,
It's
sorry.
okay. It's okay. Tell me.
And I asked the question, how do we go about writing a good RFP that describes what it is we need and put it out there right now? And, KBS is welcome to bid on it like anybody else would be, but I'd like to know what the other possibilities are out there. Chip, do you have wisdom about that process? Because none of us around this table, I think, with the exception of Jim probably, have actually been through that, the process of writing an RFP for this kind of a position and going after it.
So you're not alone, VLCT will have samples, and any other community of like size and services, you can request a copy of what they've done for RFPs, because the uniqueness you do know you have is general fund, water and sewer fund. You also know that you have restrictions on your charter in terms of several of your activities that are more stringent than the state of Vermont. So an auditor's got to know that they're coming into an environment in which a slightly different set of rules apply. And that at this moment in time, your last audit, which is what every auditor should ask you for, a copy of your last finished audit of 24, is going to reflect $1,400,000 in unobligated deficit. And since that time, in the last 2.5 months, we've had council, if you will, obliterate most of that by simply saying, well, we can't fund what we don't have. So those are the biggest pieces. The complications as well. Any number of unions that you may have can complicate what an auditor's going to do and have to do. Right now, I would say your present debt to income ratio is slightly high because you don't actually have any cash. So they'd be coming into an environment in which the last audit, I think, was glossed over as not being a big deal until somebody looked at it and said, hey, shit, this is a big deal. Some of you better do something here. It's not that you're out of cash, it's they told you were out of cash back here. I don't know how many years that's been going on. So my aspect of it is to recognize your charter does pretty clearly say the best you can do is 1 year of long-term, 1 year of short-term debt the city council is authorized to do. State statute says that you must have a plan to recover a deficit within the next 5 years, which happens to correlate with normal processing that a select board or city council would have 5 years they could enter into a debt without having to go into a bond. Well, what the state says you can do and what your charter says, should the 1.8 or the $1 million for sewer not pass public scrutiny, then your charter states you got to recover that in a year. And for the town, for the city, $32,000 is a penny. What's $1.8 million divided by 32? It's a lot of pennies to make up in the next tax bill. So, and it's not trying to be threatening, it's really, this is how we got here, and this is what our alternatives are. And the alternatives are stuck because of a choice made in a charter that is far stricter than what state statute allows. And even 1.8 covering 5 years, it's a lot of money.
So to go back, thank you, and to go back to the beginning of the question, it sounds, one thing that I think would be very helpful to the council would be if some 1 or 2 people on the task force could do the research with VLCT and contact 2 or 3 other sister cities. You know, we've gone to St. Albans over and over, and I think it'd be worthwhile to go to them again on this one, because I think they've done a good job. St. Johnsbury is another one that I think we could turn to, and get some examples of an RFP that they've done relatively recently that we could use, because I think we need to move on this very quickly. Because we know we need all these numbers very quickly.
Yep. Waterbury and Middlebury have police, water, sewer, and general government.
Oh, that's helpful. And what about St. Albans and St. J? Are they similarly set up in your experience, Chip?
Yeah, they have water, sewer, police, and general government.
Yeah.
But
Okay, so that gives us 4 that we could turn to ask for copies of any recent RFPs they've done looking for auditors, plus anything VLCT could give us. So I'm wondering if anybody here at the table could do that research over the coming week and bring us some recommendations that we could consider to take to council.
I'm happy to team up with somebody on that, just because I feel having an @newportvermont.org email address can get you,
Yes,
And I
it's
work
true.
with some of them. At least I know I work with St. J pretty well, so I know some people there. But does anybody else like RFPs?
Yeah, I'm a little swamped right now with work, but my only apprehension in diving into that is I don't know who to contact to even begin getting that information.
Yeah.
Happy to help, but I don't know about the resources.
Yeah, maybe I could gather the information, and then when it comes to like
Legwork.
assessing it and then kind of mushing it and trying to make a more Newport, or basically sorting through and analyzing them.
Yeah, that I
something.
have, I've got some bandwidth to do that.
Okay.
So, let's see.
I'll make a couple calls. I mean, if we're just calling to see if we can get a copy of an RFP or some sort of scrubbed version of their most recent RFP, for instance, we're looking for an auditor, but that's the conversation.
Yeah, sweet, okay.
And I'll just say that I'm willing to do anything. I mean, I'm swamped all the time, but this is like really high on my priority list.
Yeah,
So I've actually put a few other things aside because this is important. And I will say that I've probably learned more about auditing in the last 2 weeks than I ever thought I ever would want to know. A very good friend is a retired accountant who does small audits, and she helped me understand that really the driver is the city, the driver is the company that's being audited, so we can ask for certain things to be audited. She could explain some of those pieces and parts. And she actually gave me A.M. Peisch out of, I think they have an office in actually St. Johnsbury, but also Littleton. And I spoke with Mandy Giles from them. She called me back yesterday, and just had a very general conversation. She's willing to answer questions if we need help, just kind of navigating, depending on what we're going to do. The way she explained it to me is typically there are certain standards of auditing, and it depends on what we want. If we need a full audit, that's a lot. But certainly we can get a lot of information from VLCT, but she actually graduated from high school here. And said, if I can, send, she was going to kind of see if she could find anything that might help us with some of this stuff. But, was kind of willing to be a sounding board, whether we go with them or not. She seemed interested enough to, give us some information. So just the how process.
When I've done RFP work over the last couple of years for Newport Downtown Development, I've discovered that there's as much work in creating a list of the companies we want to send the RFP to as there is in creating the RFP itself, maybe more. So actually, I think it's a great idea, like Lori, if you'd be willing to try and come up with a list of half a dozen or more contacts where it would be logical to send this RFP. And I'm wondering if we could put this on a really tight timeline so that a week from now, we could have an RFP for the consideration of the task force, and if we pull off a meeting on Monday night the 30th, we could ask the council to take action, and we could send those things out the first day of July and get them out there, because it's going to take 2 or 3 weeks to get proposals back, right? And we know we need to get this process started as quick as we can.
So,
Do you know if you spent $1 million in federal money?
Like we triggered a single audit? Is that what you're?
Yes. That's what I'm questioning. Did you? Between police, highway, and these projects, has $1 million of federal been expended? Not been reimbursed, been spent?
Do you have any, I don't know the answer to that for sure. I know the question.
Yeah.
I know we spent $1 million for those ARPA funds, but I don't know what year they were.
Yeah, the short answer is, just to give people what's going on here, if we spent more than $1 million in a calendar year, or in our fiscal year, I'm sorry, in federal money, it triggers the need for a single audit. So it's a separate process from the regular audits that we would do at the end of a regular fiscal year. And Frank and Carter and a few others have been trying to figure out the answer to that question. We don't know if that's where we stand right now. We're still trying to figure it out.
Didn't we do a single audit this past year?
We did, a year ago, we did a single audit. So this would be looking at the fiscal year 24-25 and determining whether or not we hit the threshold for a single audit. And I think there's a good chance that we did. I just don't know it for sure. And I guess, so Chip, let me see if I can name the underlying question you're asking, which is, what I'm hearing is, if we triggered the need for a single audit, are we really asking for two proposals from a company, one for the single audit and one for the regular auditing activity of the city? Is that right?
They will need to provide two services, and it should be the same auditor.
That's good. Okay, thank you.
So hyper-focused on figuring out if we did. I have a hunch that we did, just because the ARPA funds didn't have to be spent until the end of last year, or sorry, at the end of 2024. And I think we did, through the water tower,
Spend a bunch of it.
and I think we did delay. And so I think it's best to assume and
That we're gonna need both.
Yeah, that when we're asking for people, like, and maybe a single audit, which I think a lot of these towns, especially St. J and St. Albans, would, and probably the Berries as well.
so
Does Peisch do St. J?
what's that?
Does Peisch do St. J right now?
I don't know.
I work a lot with them.
With Peisch?
And
So yeah, can y'all divide it up and figure out how you can come back with something for us by Friday? Because we're all enjoying these Friday meetings so much.
Yeah, absolutely. So I guess because there's got to be limited. I mean, I can't imagine that there's too many auditing firms out there that actually do municipal audits. The question I have is, how do we go about finding? I mean, is that a list that the LCT can give us? Do we go to one of these cities?
I went to the Auditor General for the state of Vermont. I went to that one, like that page on the state of Vermont.
Oh, really? That's interesting.
She was a state auditor.
Who?
Susan Watson, she was a state auditor.
Oh,
Ask her.
Really?
She'll have, yeah.
How come she's not sitting at this
She
time?
was one of the people who got blasted.
gotcha.
I was wondering whether or not in an RFP, one could express some things that I think have been missing from the audits. One thing in the audit that we see, there's frequently a disclaimer of some kind, like, we weren't asked to give any advice about X, so we make no comment about X. And then I think, gee, I'd like to know about X from them. Why can't we ask them for that advice? And secondly, I sometimes get the feeling that no one in the city particularly, has ever sat down with the auditor and said, well, I read line 1, 2, and 3, and I understand them. When it comes to line 4, I didn't know how you calculated that. Can you explain it to me? A sort of a duty to explain to at least one person in the city what it all really means as part of what you want out of your auditors. Now, maybe that's too much to ask, but the disclaimer clauses, and then can we get some real interpretation of what it all means?
So,
Great questions.
So I just want to answer the first thing. and this comes from my friend who helped me to understand some of this. And she said, go back and look at any documentation that we might have that gives the direction to our current auditors to find out what it is that we've asked them to look at. Because you might see something, but we've only asked them, I mean, like when she was asked to help out on something in our sister city over here, they were told to look only at transactions that were of a certain amount and nothing lower. And so anything that, anything, I'm just going to throw this out, anything $1,000 or more got looked at and anything under $1,000 didn't. And, so that was the recommendation, is to go back and look at any documentation that we have from our current auditors and find out what exactly it is we've asked them to do. And maybe that was something that was done 20 years ago or 15 years ago and it hasn't been looked at. That document hasn't been looked at. I don't know. So that was the
Want to say something about
recommendation.
that?
I don't know if there's any of that around, anything like that around, I've never seen.
Yeah.
Roland, you
I
have a
mean, I've
question?
seen the manager.
On this page here of your report, that there's the auditor's note, it says there's a packet here.
Yes,
Yeah, okay. Where's that packet?
it's in the treasurer's office.
And where are the ones from when these troubles started? Where are those packets?
Back years.
Yeah,
Back
I'm going to know that these
Yeah, Jim's got copies of all of that.
Okay, we need to have those.
The one that's easy is this last year is sitting, they're already bound and they're sitting, or photocopied and they're bound in Jim's office. There's still a bunch left, I
We
think.
would like to, I want to see what they've got to say. I want to know, how this started, who found out that things were going wrong, and when did they find out?
Yep. Jennifer?
I'd like to share an experience, and it will probably make you angry, Rick. Because you will.
So I'm gonna, hold on.
But no, it
So
has to
please,
be.
hold on just a moment before you begin. While we are being incredibly candid with one another, we are also being filmed. And I would ask that however you share this experience, it not be directed at particular people. That's my request. Because at the moment, this team has to be focused on how did we get here and how do we get out of it. And so I am not interested today in opening up a conversation that takes us into kind of personal accusations. So if you can share that story without personal accusations, I am more than interested in hearing it. And if you can't, then we should think about another way to do it.
I will try.
Okay.
If I
I
somehow.
will stop you when I think we're over the
I was going to
edge.
say, if I'm crossing the line, you let me know. The audit was ongoing. I became aware of a receivable that the city was carrying on its books that was not a bona fide receivable, that if it was allowed to stand, would make the financial situation of the city look better than what it really was. I reached out to the auditors to alert them to this and to offer the evidence that the receivable was not a bona fide receivable. The auditors dodged my phone calls and did not return my voicemails. Behind the scenes, the auditors were communicating with a high-ranking city official. The high-ranking city official asked to have all of my voicemails and a record of my phone calls sent to the city attorneys. And it was Sheehy, Furlong, and Bem to which they were sent. I finally, out of necessity, left the lion's share of my message with the secretary because I could not make contact with the auditor. I then had a complaint filed against my law license for criminal interference with the city audit. So in my opinion, the auditors are way too cozy with some of the high-ranking city officials and did not actually look at the data in front of them, but rather, in my opinion, the propaganda being given to them. And as such, it really, in my opinion, skewed the result of what occurred. The message did not fall completely on deaf ears because the auditors ultimately refused to include the receivable on the city audit, but they couched it in language that I am assuming, cannot verify that this for a fact, but I am assuming came from the high-ranking city official, that there were ongoing negotiations that may indeed someday result in this receivable theoretically being bona fide. So that's what we're dealing with KBS. And as a resident, I would urge you guys to move on to a different firm.
So I'm going to stop you there.
Yep.
I think we've got your point. And in fact, that's exactly what the conversation is that's taking place.
Okay.
So it's not an accident that we are having a conversation about putting out an RFP to look for qualified applicants for that contract.
So it's the whole contract, not for this special audit that you're...
No, it's the whole contract.
Okay.
In fact, what I'm hearing Chip say is it absolutely should be both.
Okay.
It should be whoever we choose should be handling both the single audit and the normal activity audit that we would typically request.
And then, this is a question for Chip. I know just enough about accounting, Chip, to be dangerous. So my question is, in reference to looking at the current financial situation of the city, would an operational audit be appropriate? Because I've been asking for quite some time now for an internal audit, right? Because I don't know the exact language of what's appropriate. And I've been, shot down and maligned in that whole process. And I've been told recently that the term that I want is an operational audit that will really go in kind of at a line item level and really dive into the integrity of what the city is carrying on its books and the financial position of the city. Comments?
So an operational audit is less about the numbers and more about the procedures.
Right.
And if your procedures aren't documented, then the audit's done. Okay, that's how it works. And because then they would spot check 10% of the entries and see if they actually followed what the procedures are. And so again, operations is a different animal than a financial audit. Operations are part of a financial audit, but also you have to be careful that an auditor doesn't try to give you guidance on something that they are auditing. Because then they, if you will, are self-fulfilling the audit requirements. So many communities hire a CPA to help them straighten out the books and hire a separate CPA to do the audit. And I'm not a CPA, but I play one on TV. And so that's what I'm trying to do, is help you get into financial reports that are justifiable. And right now, justifiable to me, I'm just looking at balance sheets. What you have, what you owe, and what you're worth. And from there, if KBS picks up their 24 audit and tries to come forward through 25, the first thing they have to recognize is the committed fund balance spreadsheet no longer plays a role.
Right.
And so they may have to restate 24's ending or acknowledge that there's a huge, drop off in what was perceived as a deficit of unreserved fund balance has now become a surplus of fund balance simply by removing commitments. And so our real crux is that we are out of cash. And there's no way to recover being out of cash other than to borrow more cash. That's what this whole cash flow activity was. And it's really, I'm not sure when it really surfaced, but since I've gotten involved just reading financial statements 2.5, 3 months ago, significant changes have taken place. And so asking someone to come in and say, we'd like just an operational audit. We don't have procedures in place now for them to even look at.
That's right.
So if we can get, for some savings bank, for the bond bank, a clean audit that reflects that we don't have a deficit of undesignated fund balance at the end of 25, I think the whole attitude of the city's position financially will have shifted. But internally, there's going to be a lot of department heads who said, you told me I had 300 grand for paving and I don't. And the public's going to say, when are you going to pave that road, that street? We can't, we don't have the money. Those are the true impacts of living with a financial reporting system that is broken down between a chip writing system and a bunch of spreadsheets. And I've been trying to make it be that what we're reporting is out of the financial system, and the spreadsheets may be backed up for the grant project in order to report activity related to a project in which we have in-kind services. In-kind services, we pay employees like we always do, but we can call that as our share towards a project. And so to the project, we report that as part of the expenses, and then our income in kind. But in the financials, none of that shows up. It only shows up in the grant documentation. So all of those things playing together, we're still looking to just get a balance sheet for all funds that we know is true for the assets, liabilities, reserves, and fund balance. And that if I've guided you best I can, we should end up at the end of 25, maybe with a surplus fund balance in the operating, which is the tax fund. But we won't have the money to go with it because the majority of what would be our surplus is owed from sewer and water. And that's not going away.
So if I could just kind of pull us back in, I'm watching the clock. We've got about 10 minutes left. And I want to make sure we go back because Carter was half an hour ago trying to name the 3 buckets of activity. Do those 3 buckets still make sense, and do you want to repeat them?
Okay. I've been adding to them.
Yes, that's what I was afraid of.
So, big picture, budget basics and the impacts. I feel like those, having tangible examples will be really helpful.
You're talking about in the education process?
Yes, the education. So step 1 is building that foundation. Step 2 would be accountability. And I don't know if that could be teased into one of these others because I think we could cover that accurately, not taking too long. But the third thing would be the lending tools in our path forward in tandem with the new guardrails for the fiscal responsibility, whether that is this internal controls, and one of those is a new audit. So I think that those are like the main 3 buckets.
And the fact that one of the things that we have to do is take a deeper dive in the breakout of the operational budgets. I so appreciated what Chip showed the other night, where everything was under the headings. But at some point, we really have to dig into certain headings and find out what's going on.
Yeah, so that could be one of the measures is not part of the going forward and making sure that doesn't happen is how the city council can review these things. But also, you're right, that's long term, but also right now addressing maybe one of those budget pieces, or what are you're going to?
Well, I mean, I'm just chuckling about that one because,
Yeah.
I mean, I had plenty of questions when Chip finished the other night that would demand going deeper into some of those areas.
Yes.
You know, I wonder how we seem to have spent $140,000 in the city manager line item when we only had a city manager for a few months. I'm not trying to answer it tonight. I'm not going there tonight.
I know the answer.
I'm not going there tonight. So I'm saying there are a lot of places like that where if this team wanted to go deeper, it would be welcome, starting with Chip's trial balance summary sheets and saying, okay, now let's look at the what actually took place underneath it, because I think the council's going to need to be educated about those things.
I agree with your buckets. I would just make a small tweak.
Yeah.
I think that we shouldn't pair the lending tools with the guardrails. I think it should be the budget basics, the historic accountability and future state guardrails, and then add the lending tools and the alternative. Because that's the choice that we have. So it's all there. I was just a little reorganization.
Right.
And this long conversation about the auditor, I think, is another piece of the trust building, right?
Yes.
If we can make it clear in this process that we are putting out an RFP to find a new auditor to look at last year's, this year we're just completing books, right? And help us make sure that we're starting in a clean position. And, honestly, I think that highlighting the work that Chip has done on our behalf over the last 2.5 months as well is a piece of that. Because we sure know a lot more now than we knew 2.5 months ago. At least some of us knew 2.5 months ago.
I think rebuilding the trust is going to be so big because these people have been elected over and over and over and over for years, just throughout the course of different election cycles, right? So we always assume when we're electing an official that they're going to be doing the right thing and they're going to, so restoring that trust.
Or that they're qualified.
And qualifications certainly are important. So just restoring the trust is going to be huge because if we don't have that, they're not going to listen to anything.
Okay, so I'll mush and I'll make a rough outline of these 3 buckets. Trying to go back to time. Maybe you also kind of do a doodle poll and again, maybe, because we're at the end of June, if we're wanting this vote mid-August, we're going to need to have something out and digestible to the public probably the end of July. I would want to say this by middle July, but,
middle to third week.
Yeah, exactly. Thank you. It was kind of goes.
And are you thinking like a forum like you did for downtown development kind of thing?
Well, that may be one piece of a number of things we could do.
Yes. But yeah, maybe we'll find a date and start to advertise, and then that way we have a deadline to build this. Well, yeah, I'm happy to help, but I definitely agree that I don't need to be the person with the microphone. I'm there to support. Okay, so that's one piece. So that's my homework, is mushing together just like an outline. And then other homework is I'm going to send out those internal controls, and we can review those and maybe have that as one of the agenda items for the July 7th council meeting. Separate, easy-ish. And then the other piece is building out the RFP. So it sounds like Susie and I can start just reaching out to peeps, and I'll email you about
start posting them, I can start doing some analysis and putting things together.
Right. I'll probably just collect them in the Google Drive, and we'll just say, hey, it's ready to be assessed. Or
So once we get all the buckets and we do the moshing together, then we come up with a communication strategy.
yes. So yeah, that could be a good piece. Is do we want this to all be one form, or is this something we should piece together, or could this be settled with a number of things? Yeah.
Are we
Yeah.
empowered to do that piece, or do we need to make recommendations to council?
Everything you're doing is a recommendation to council. So, what would be ideal would be on the 7th, when the council warns the meeting, to be able to have a basic strategy in place for the council to say,
Yeah.
the task force's work on this looks exemplary, go for it.
So it's really 2 weeks, 2 full weeks.
It's 2 weeks from now, and we're going to lose the Friday afternoon of 4th of July weekend. So if we're going to meet in that week, it's going to have to be a different time.
And, sorry, you want me to, I can talk to Susan, but try to
I think if you
put
could come up
together
with a
a list
list
of what
from-
firms
Yep.
to go for.
Call the state auditor, or look at the state auditor website. Carter can maybe come up with some stuff for you on the VLCT website.
Yes, that was a tip, yeah.
And if you have contacts in some of the cities, what Mandy at AMPES said is that, or probably said that sometimes they'll just give you like, hey, these are the 5 firms we went to. And,
Yeah, that's
so
a great question,
as you're
actually, to ask.
contacting them,
Great
ask,
Who'd you actually like working with too?
Yeah.
Okay, yeah, you're
and
forced to.
I can put together a mailing list and,
Yeah.
But on the question of the RFP, really, time is of the essence. So trying to get those initial responses back from other sister cities by the middle of next week would be really helpful to us.
Yeah, okay.
This feels really useful, everybody. Thank you.
Yes, and everybody's opinions, I've just been like, oh, I would have never thought of that, and oh, thank you for sharing, so nice, much appreciated. Total transparency is I won't be available next Friday due to wedding news, so,
I can be here,
okay, great.
so I can set up the tech team.
But I will be.
Chip, are you around next Friday afternoon? Can you join us again?
Probably.
Gee, I can't imagine what you could do that would be more fun than this, Chip.
On a Friday afternoon.
Go out to dinner, maybe?
yeah, that's where I'm going in about 15 minutes.
I would suggest that prior to committing to sending RFPs out to CPA firms, you let me review the list because I can steer you away from problems.
Excellent. We would welcome your help.
That's why we pay you the big bucks, Chip.
Well, I get paid, okay?
Touche. All right. Anything I'm forgetting? Because this was a very productive meeting.
I think so too.
There's a lot of work to do.
Yeah.
Short term and long term.
Yeah. Oh, we haven't even started talking about budgeting process for next week. Okay.
Enough for today.
Wrapping it, calling it,
Yeah.
gavel. Thank you, everybody.
Thanks, everybody.
Thank you.
Thank you, Pam.